Hi guys, welcome back to the Mina Does Art Stuff YouTube channel. My name is Mina and on this channel we do art stuff. So today we are taking a look at another colour comparison video, and today's colour comparisons are going to be the Alizarn Crimson / Carmine family of colours. Now the original Alizarn Crimson is PR83. I have one version of that on this that we're going to look at. It is not a light fast pigment, so many of the brands offer a permanent version which is considered more light fast. So we were looking at those as well as the Carmine colour as well, because a lot of palettes will either have Alizarn Crimson or Carmine. Both serve the same sort of purpose on a palette, and so we're going to take a look at both and see how similar they are. Now the typical, quote unquote typical Carmine pigment is PR176 or like a PV19 variation, but there are a few other versions of a few different pigments that we're going to look at that kind of serve a similar sort of colour purpose, as it were. So this one's a little bit different than some of the others where we've been focusing on like either a specific colour name or pigment, and so this is kind of like 2-in-1 kind of thing. Right, so we're going to start off with Winsor & Newton's Permanent Alizarn Crimson, and that's right here in my palette. This one, oh, I should mention I'm also using Arches 100% cotton cold pressed paper, my Da Vinci size 8 Collineo round brush, and I will have everything including paper and brush linked in the description box below. Some of the links may be affiliate links, but it doesn't cost you anything extra, it just means I get a small commission if you use it. And yeah, it's a great way to help support the channel. Let me know in the comments if there are any other colours you'd like to see me do in this series, and or which version of these colours that I'm swatching today is your favourite in the comment section below. Alright, so let's start with the Winsor & Newton Permanent Alizarn Crimson. This is PR206, which is actually a pigment that is being discontinued. I did do an episode, or yeah, I guess a video in this series on PR206. I didn't include this version because this obviously is a Alizarn Crimson version. The Brown Madder is the Winsor & Newton PR206 other pigment, which is definitely more earthy. So this pigment is being discontinued, so it'll be interesting to see what Winsor & Newton replaces this with for their permanent Alizarn Crimson going forward. Then next up we have Da Vinci's Alizarn Crimson Quinacridone, which is a PV19. It's the only PV19 Alizarn Crimson I've come across so far. So that's here in my palette. I have a couple of I've got at least one PV19 Carmine coming up, and there's another Alizarn Crimson which has PV19 in the mixture, but this is the only one that is a straight up just PV19 quinacridone pigment. Next up we have Rosa Gallery. There's the one from theirs that I'm swatching is called Carmine. So their Carmine is PR170:1. Next up we have Schminker. They have a colour called Permanent Carmine, which is also a PV19. That's over here. Next up we have Roman Schmall's Permanent Alizarn Crimson. Now have their permanent Alizarn Crimson, if I can find it, here we go, is PR 176, which is, like I mentioned earlier, a pigment typically used for carmine. This is kind of why I grouped these two together, because there's a couple of brands that use the PR 176 as their Alizarn Crimson colour. So it's a little bit hard to sort of split the two. I was originally going to do a separate video on carmine and Alizarn Crimson, but because there's quite an overlap with some of the brands, that just made sense to do them together. Next up we have the White Knights. Theirs is Madder Lake Light, PR 187. And this very much fills in that sort of Alizarn Crimson slot on this palette, or in their range of colours, I guess I should say. It's a little bit warmer, slightly less pink undertone than some of the others that we've been looking at. Next up we have permanent Alizarn Crimson from Daniel Smith. This is a mixture of 3 pigments. This is PR 177, which is also known as Anthraquinone Red, PV19, so a quinacridone rose violet pigment, and PR 149, which I can't remember what colour that one is. It's another red pigment. Now this one has some controversy around how light fast it really is, because some people have done tests that show that the PR 177 pigment isn't as light fast as some brands claim, but I would always recommend you do your own light fastness testing if you want to be sure how your paints are going to hold up. Okay, next we're going to look at Daniel Smith's Carmine. This is PR 176. Next up we are going to look at Holbein's permanent Alizarn Crimson, just down here. Now the Holbein permanent Alizarn Crimson is made up of PV19, so a quinacridone rose type colour, I guess, or violet, and PBR25, which is interesting. I've not seen a mixture like this one before. And PBR25 is a permanent brown, or benzimidazoline brown, I think is what it's also called. It's a very transparent reddish brown. Next up we have 2 versions from Magello. I just forgot to list them together, so they're one above the other. So we have permanent Alizarn Crimson from Magello, which is another mixture. It is PV19, so again like a quinacridone rose, permanent rose colour. PR 179, which is Peroline Maroon, and PR 122, which is quinacridone magenta. That's a lovely pinkish hue. And then the other version we're going to look at is Rose Madder, which is the PR 176 pigment, so that's the Carmine pigment from Magello that some other brands use as their alternative of permanent Alizarn Crimson as a single pigment option. Next up, we're going to look at the original Alizarn Crimson colour from Sennelier. This one does fade, like the swatch here is already faded from what it looks like when it's freshly swatched out. And the swatch, you know, at most is maybe a few months old. So this is the original Alizarn Crimson pigment, PR83. There are plenty of brands that still offer this original colour, but most also offer a permanent alternative as well. Because to some people, light fastness might not be that important, especially if they are scanning their work rather than selling originals, or just want it for their sketchbooks or something. So it does depend on what your needs are in terms of needing light fastness or not. Okay, next up we're going to take a look at Turner's Rose Madder. And this is PR187, so similar, same pigment as the White Knight's Madder Lake Light. Then we have a couple of options that I only have in tubes at the moment. So first up, we're going to look at the Shinhan Pass. This is a gouache watercolour hybrid. This is their Alizarn Crimson. Okay. This is a mix of PR83, so that original Alizarn Crimson pigment, mixed with PR122, so quinacridone magenta. You can really see that magenta colour coming through in this mixture. This is probably the most magenta looking version of this colour. That okay, I'm not sure where that stopped filming, but we've just done the Shinhan Pass Alizarn Crimson, which is PR83 and PR122, so that's the original Alizarn Crimson mixed with quinacridone magenta. And then the Lucas Alizarn Crimson, which uses the Carmine pigment of PR176. Okay, and the last colour is Paul Rubens Madder Red. It's PR177. So that's all of those colours done. I'm going to let that dry off, and then once the swatches have dried, we'll come back and take a look and see what we think, and I'll let you know which ones are my favourites. The swatches have dried now, so we're going to take a closer look at everything, and I'm going to start out by just telling you which ones are my favourites, I guess. So right off the bat, I will say I like the Winsor & Newton Permanent Alizarn Crimson over the Daniel Smith one. They're very similar. I'd say these two are very similar to each other, but I would pick the Winsor & Newton, at least this version of it, for two reasons. One is a single pigment compared to a triple pigment, which I don't normally care about that, but if I have the choice, I will go for the single pigment over the multi-pigment one. But mostly because that PR177 is a bit questionable on its light fastness. So, and light fastness for me personally is important. I don't mind using non-light fast pigments, but I make sure to use them in ways that, like in a sketchbook or for stuff I might want to digitize and not gonna be on display, or for things that, you know, might not be for long-term display, things like birthday cards and things like that. But, you know, there again, if I had to choose between two, I will go for the one that is light fast. So that would be my differentiation there. I really like the Da Vinci Alizarn Crimson Quinacridone as well. I'd say those two are also very similar to each other. The Rosa Carmine is really pretty. Reminds me, it's actually quite different to all the other ones, which is interesting. Schminke Permanent Carmine, not my favourite, but I only have a ½ pound of this one anyway. The Roman Schmall Permanent Alizarn Crimson is one that I absolutely love, but I also really like that PR 176 pigment. So in that line, I also really like the Daniel Smith Carmine and the Lucas Alizarn Crimson as well. Even the Rose Madder by Magello, but I'm actually not going to mark that one only because I don't have the tube of this one. And additionally, the Magello tends to have quite a shine on the mass tone, if you can see that there, if you put it on too thickly. So it's actually a no on that one. I prefer the other versions of PR 176. The Sennelier original Alizarn Crimson is beautiful here. But let me grab my original swatch sheet from the palette, which is a few months old, and you can see already how much this is faded to this. So yeah, this is not a color that's going to stand up to a lot of sunlight, and this doesn't even have massive sun exposure. This is just on the outside of my palette, and you know, it gets incidental sunlight in my office, like it's not indirect sunlight all the time, but you can see how much it's faded to here. This isn't a colour that I think is particularly pretty, but this is. So this is what I mean by the original Alizarn Crimson is very fugitive, and this is not a colour I would use on anything that would get any sort of light exposure. Purely a sketchbook colour. And the Holbein Permanent Alizarn Crimson is also really interesting, but not my favourite. The Turner Rose Madder Hue is probably the most different one, so I wouldn't necessarily consider that part of this. It's same with the Paul Rubens Madder Red, it's a bit different, and the Madder Late Light. So I'd say these three are probably the outliers in terms of hue compared to all the others. But yeah, my favourites would be the Winsor & Newton Da Vinci Daniel Smith Carmine, Lucas Alizarn Crimson, and the Roman Schmall Permanent Alizarn Crimson. Those ones are my favourites. I'm interested to hear which ones are yours. I do like the Rosa Carmine, but again, I feel like that's a bit of an outlier colour-wise. The Shinhan Pass Alizarn Crimson is completely different. It's very magenta in its hue and not at all similar, not at all the same as all the rest. On camera at the moment, it looks fairly similar, but this is vastly more magenta pink than all the others. So again, I'd say that's like a no for me in this colour family. Yeah, so those are my favourites. Let me know which ones do you think, which ones are your favourites. Ironically, I've gone for all the single pigment variations. Like I said, I'm not super fussed on that, but there again, if I was to choose, if I had the choice, which I clearly do, I will go for the single pigment option over a multi-pigment one if it's available. All other things being the same, essentially. Alright, that's it for this one, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Alright, take care. Bye.